I'm Jeremy. Today is day 150 reading. Today I'm reading Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Let's get started. We're on page 138. At least that's what I think. Ridiculous! Shouted Seamus. The banshee made a rasping noise and clutched her throat. Her voice was gone. Crack! The banshee turned into a rat, which chased its tail in a circle. Then, crack! Became a rattlesnake, which slithered and writhed before, crack! Becoming a single bloody eyeball. It's confused! Shouted Lupin. We're getting there! Dean! Dean hurried forward. Crack! The eyeball became a severed hand, which flipped over and began to creep along the floor like a crab. Ridiculous! Yelled Dean. There was a snap, and the hand was trapped in a mouse trap. Excellent. Ron, you next. Ron leapt forward. Crack! Quite a few people screamed. A giant spider, 6 feet tall and covered in hair, was advancing on Ron, clicking its pincers menacingly. For a moment, Harry thought Ron had frozen. Then, ridiculous! Bellowed Ron, and the spider's legs vanished. It rolled over and over. Lavender Brown squealed and ran out of its way, and it came to a halt at Harry's feet. He raised his wand. Ready, but here! Shouted Professor Lupin suddenly, hurrying forward. Crack! The legless spider had vanished. For a second, everyone looked wildly around to see where it was. Then they saw a silvery white orb hanging in the air in front of Lupin, who said, Ridiculous! Almost lazily. Crack! Forward, Neville, and finish him off, said Lupin as the boggart landed on the floor as a cockroach. Snape! Crack! Snape was back. This time, Neville charged forward, looking determined. Ridiculous! He shouted, and they had a split-second view of Snape in his lacy dress before Neville let out a great ha of laughter, and the boggart exploded, burst into 1,000 tiny wisps of smoke, and was gone. Excellent! Cried Professor Lupin as the class broke into applause. Excellent, Neville. Well done, everyone. Let me see. 5 points to Gryffindor for every person who tackled the boggart. 10 for Neville because he did it twice, and 5 to each Hermione and Harry. But I didn't do anything, said Harry. You and Hermione answered my questions correctly at the start of the class. Harry, Lupin said lightly. Very well, everyone, an excellent lesson. Homework, kindly read the chapter on boggarts and summarize it for me, to be handed in on Monday. That will be all. Tugging excitedly, the class left the staff room. Harry, however, wasn't feeling cheerful. Professor had deliberately stopped him from tackling the boggart. Why? Was it because he had seen Harry collapse on the train and thought he wasn't up to much? Had he thought Harry would pass out again? No, but no one seemed to have noticed anything. Did you see me take that banshee? Shouted Seamus. And the hand, said Dean, waving his own around, and Snape in that hat. And my mummy. I wonder why Professor Lupin's frightened of crystal balls, said Lavender thoughtfully. That was the best defense against dark arts lesson we've ever had, wasn't it? Said Ron excitedly as they made their way back to the classroom to get their bags. He seems like a very good teacher, said Hermione approvingly, but I wish I could have had it a turn with the boggart. What would it have been for you? Said Ron, sniggering. A piece of homework that only got 9 out of 10? Chapter 8. Flight of the Fat Lady. I think so. In no time, Defense Against the Dark Arts had become everyone's most favorite class. Only Draco Malfoy and his gangs of Slytherins had anything bad to say about Professor Lupin. Look at the state of his robes, Malfoy would say in a loud whisper as Professor Lupin passes. He dresses like our old house elf. But no one else cared that Professor Lupin's robes were patched and frayed. His next few lessons were just as interesting as the first. After Boggarts, they studied redcaps, nasty little goblin-like creatures that lurked wherever there had been bloodshed, in the dungeons of castles and the potholes of deserted battlefields, waiting to bludge on those who had gotten lost. From red capes, they moved on to kappas, creepy water dwellers that looked like scaly monkeys, with webbed hands itching to strangle unwitting waders into their pond. Harry only wished he was as happy with some of his other classes. Worst of all was potions. Snape was in a particularly vindictive mood these days, and no one was in any doubt why. The story of the Boggart assuming Snape's shape and the way that Neville had dressed it in his grandmother's clothes had traveled through the school like wildfire. Snape didn't seem to find it funny. His eyes flashed menacingly at the very mention of Professor Lupin's name, and he was bullying Neville worse than ever. Harry was also growing to dread the hours he spent in Professor Trelawney's stifling tower room, deciphering lopsided shapes and symbols, trying to ignore the way Professor Trelawney's enormous eyes filled with tears every time she looked at him. He couldn't like Professor Trelawney, even though she was treated with respect, bordering on reverence by many of the class. Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown had taken him to haunting Professor Trelawney's tower room at lunchtimes, and eyes were turned with annoyingly superior looks on their faces, as though they knew things that others didn't. They had also started using hushed voices whenever they spoke to Harry, as though he were on his deathbed. Nobody really liked care of magical creatures. Which, after the action-packed first class, had become extremely dull. Hagrid seemed to have lost his confidence. They were now spending lesson after lesson learning how to look after flabberworms, which had to be some of the most boring creatures in existence. "Why would anyone bother looking for them?" said Ron, after yet another hour of poking shredded lettuce down the flabberworms' slimy throats. At the start of October, however, Harry had something else to occupy him, something so enjoyable it more than made up for his unsatisfactory classes. The Quidditch season was approaching, and Oliver Wood, captain of the Crivener team, called a meeting one Thursday evening to discuss tactics for the new season. There were 7 people on the Quidditch team. 3 chasers whose job it was to score goals by putting the quaffle, a red soccer-sized ball, through one of the 50-foot-high hoops at each end of the field. 2 beaters who were equipped with heavy bats to repel the bludgers, 2 heavy black balls that zoomed around trying to attack the players, a keeper who defended the goalposts, and a seeker who had the hardest job of all, that of catching the golden snitch, a tiny winged walnut-sized ball, whose capture ended the game and earned the Seeker's team an extra 150 points. Oliver Wood was a burly 17-year-old, now in his 7th and final year at Hogwarts. There was a quiet sort of desperation in his voice as he addressed his fellow team members in the chilly locker rooms on the edge of the darkening Quidditch field. "This is our last chance, my last chance, to win the Quidditch Cup," he told them, striding up and down in front of them. "I'll be leaving at the end of this year. I'll never get another shot at it. Gryffindor hasn't won for 7 years now, okay? So we had the worst luck in the world. Injuries, the tournament getting called off last year." Wood swallowed, as though the memory still brought a lump into his throat. "But we also know we've got the best running team in the school," he said, punching a fist into his other hand, the old magnet gleamed back in his eyes. Thank you, everyone. That's all for today. Bye. See you tomorrow. Finally, for once it didn't end too late. Haha.